Back in the 70s I used to be a tool maker, and this is one small thing I made at the time to help me get the jobs done. These days, being retired, I spend a lot of time on YouTube watching videos of guys making things, but I've never seen anything like this, which is quite a handy little tool. So I thought maybe I'd post something to show how it's made. This one, as I said, was made in the 70s. I've recently made another one to make a pair, but I don't have any material to make it again to post, so all I can do really is an explanation of what it is and how it works. As you can see, it's a bed clamp. It's got an adjustable bolt for the T-slot, fits in there like that, and in this case I can use it to hold my toolmaker's vise down, tighten it up, and the vise is nice and solid. It's riveted construction in this case. It's got two rivets, two riveted spacer pieces, one here and one here. This piece here needs to swivel because it takes the screw thread. As you can see, you need a swivel in here, and that one there needs to swivel. So if you make it this way, obviously you need to put at least this piece and this piece in, this piece and this piece in before you rivet it, because you won't get them in after. This is a different matter. I'll explain how to make it in a moment. So this is the one I made in the 70s, and this is the one that I've just made recently. Made a couple of small adjustments to it. You can ad-lib lots of parts on there. I've done a couple of sketches which I can show in a minute. Obviously you start with two sides in plate steel, 1/8 or 3mm is what I've used. I made this drawing of the parts that make up the sides. If you want to get an idea of what I've used, you can see it here. If you pause your video, you can probably make a note or two. The two sides are held apart by two riveted spacers. I've used 16mm as the spacing distance between them, and then the other parts that fit in there obviously have got to be free to swivel, so you want to make sure that it's less than the 16mm so it doesn't bind. This one, you can see this is the riveted one. It's got 5mm spigots to go through the 3mm thick material, and that gives you enough to peen over the ends. The bits that go in there and swivel, there are two like this, and in that case the spigots only need to stand up 3mm to be the same thickness as the sides, and of course it's going to swivel, and I've made it 0.2 thinner than the 16mm on the riveted parts. This is the one pivoting part, and this is the other. This one takes the arm, but the arm itself is what pivots, so there's no spacer to go in there. The arm obviously has to swivel within the 16mm gap, So I made the thickness of the arm 15.5 and I made it like this. Again, I use riveted construction for the one end. At the end of the day you want this to be 15.5, so depending on what material the sides of the arms are, you need to calculate the middle of this spacer so that when you rivet it the overall width will be about 15.5. This side takes a bolt and basically it's a washer, but again the thickness of the washer needs to ensure that the overall thickness is 15.5. You put in this relief to improve the situation when you clamp. This is a pivot hole which takes the end of the clamping bolt, which goes into this little adapter. Basically it's a 16mm piece with a 6mm flat milled into it and cross drilled. Also there's a small 1.5mm hole which are drilled so that when it's assembled you can put a small pin in there, which means that when you unwind it, it pulls the arm back up. You just want to make sure that when you're clamping down that the clamping bolt doesn't actually rest on the pin, or you'll shear the pin obviously. You need to ensure that the bottom of the clamping bolt actually is in the bottom of the hole without putting any pressure on that pin. The T-bolt screws in here into the spacer which is there. I've had to improvise a bit here due to lack of materials. It's a bit of round bar that I've milled into a T-slot. You can put quite a long bolt in there, but you need to make sure that it can swivel, and if the bolt goes right through, that it doesn't foul on the end of this arm, which based on what I'm showing you here, there is clearance, and so you could have a bolt that a T-bolt that goes quite a long way past the end of the arm. Sorry, went off picture then. The bolt could run up here and miss the end of the arm, which stops about there. This is the clamp that I made recently. One thing I didn't mention was, in order to avoid having to turn and thread this long screw, I milled the head off turned the head off a bolt, put it inside a piece of steel and put a roll pin in there. So that's how I made that. Of course you could turn the whole thing and run a die up there, but that's how I made this one. Here you can see it clamping my vise quite a long distance off the bed, but you can adjust it quite quickly and easily like this. Just screw in the T-bolt, T-nut bolt, and then clamp down there. So it's quite quick and easy to use. As I said, I think it's quite a worthwhile little tool, handy to have in the workshop. Clamps strongly. I think most guys can see the way it works. It's quick and easy to use. You have to mill some relief between there to take this 6mm width of that. That's an 8mm bolt that goes through to swivel the end of this arm. that's I think a 6mm so that this can pivot. There's a little cutout here so that it gives the clearance when you're in that sort of arrangement, clearance for that. You may have to mark that out as you go, but none of it's rocket science, but it works quite nicely and it's a nice little project.